The world's biodiversity is rapidly declining, posing a serious threat to our own survival. I speak with Russel Mittermeier from Rewild, who has dedicated his life to highlighting the importance of preserving nature's hotspots.
A harrowing story, too.
That was a scary one, yeah.
I met Russel Mittermeier in our studio in Washington, D.C.
Russ, I've read a good deal about you, and I don't normally do word association, but I'm going to do it to start with. Tarzan.
Tarzan, one of the reasons I'm in this business. I grew up on the Tarzan books and Tarzan movies and the Tarzan comics, and that really instilled in me a sense of adventure, desire to go out and see places that no one else had seen before, and really to live a life in the rainforest, and then called the jungle. I even, when they tried to, my mother tried to enroll me in Catholic school when I was 6 years old, first grade, and the sister, the head nun or whatever you call them these days, she said, "What's your name, son?" And I said, "Tarzan." And she said, "Well, we can't call you that here." And I said, "If you don't call me Tarzan, I'm not going to go to your lousy school." So my mother took me out, whacked me a few times and said, "Shut up and get back in there." So they finally accepted me.
Mittermeier is Chief Conservation Officer of Rewild. He specializes in primatology, biodiversity, and conservation. His writing includes 38 books and more than 700 publications.
So this is the early stages of a life of, following this dream about conservation. But early on, you like to go to the zoo, you like turtles, reptiles. Kind of talk to us about kind of this evolution. What was it like as a kid?
Well, first I started off in the Bronx, which is not known for its biodiversity. Stayed there until age 7, then moved to Brooklyn. And then at age 9, we moved out to Long Island, which still had, where we were in Long Island, Suffolk County, there was still some natural areas left. There still are if you go really far out on the island. But my mother, who was a housewife, German immigrant, she would take me to the Bronx Zoo and the American Museum of Natural History just about every week. I mean, she really loved animals. And I think had she been born in a different time, she might have become a field biologist herself. But she would take me to these places, and all the time I was exposed to wildlife. And then when I got out to Long Island, I started going out and collecting turtles, snakes, frogs, salamanders, whatever I could find, kept them in my backyard, and then started engaging with some of the societies, the professional societies that were around at that time to interact with other people interested in these animals.
And that lure of the field, describe that for me as a young guy going out there. What's that like? I mean, it's a heady experience. You're still doing it today, so it's a love affair. What's that like?
Well, blame it on the Tarzan books, right? I mean, I just read them. There's about 70 odd books by Edgar Rice Burroughs, I think 23 or 24 about Tarzan. And I just read every single one of them several times over. And I just had instilled in me the sense that I wanted to see new places. I wanted to explore. I wanted to see as many countries and ecosystems as possible. And when I started doing it, this was so fascinating. Every time I went out, I would find something new. You go into a forest here and you kind of know what you're going to see. If you're in a tropical rainforest, you never know what's around the corner. And you never know if you're going to discover a species new to science, which I've done a number of times. And so it's just a thrill. And to this day, it's a thrill. And I'm always trying to get out into new places that I haven't been to. I like going to the places I've been, but I really always want to get out and see new places, experience new things. And by now, I'm pretty sure I've been to more rainforests than anybody else ever, because I've been all around the New World tropics, the Amazon and other parts of South and Central America. I've been in a lot of places in Africa and a lot of places in Southeast Asia. The island of New Guinea doesn't have primates, but has incredible biodiversity. So I've been in so many different rainforest systems. Maybe there's somebody else out there who's been to more, but I haven't met him yet.
Mittermeier recently received a lifetime honorary position in recognition of his legacy and achievements in the field of primate conservation and research.
One of the things I found really interesting is you've chaired the IUCN Primate Specialist Group since 1977. What I found interesting about this was that it wasn't something where you went and lobbied for it. You wrote letters, and then finally they were like, let's just give it to this guy. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, well, the IUCN is this international global organization that brings together both governments and non-governmental organizations together in a variety of different fora. And they have 6 commissions. One of the commissions is the Species Survival Commission, which is the largest network of volunteers working on conservation of species. It's about 10,000 members, and they're divided into about 180 different specialist groups. And I've chaired this primate specialist group for 48 years now. And when I started in graduate school, I had moved into studying primates along with reptiles. And I saw that this specialist group existed, but it wasn't really doing very much. So I started corresponding with the people who were, in charge of the Species Survival Commission as a whole. And finally in 1977, after I finished my PhD, they said, okay, why don't you just chair the thing? And so I took it over, and I basically have worked to create an entire global primate conservation community ever since. We have about 800 members now, very active group, very successful group. And yeah, I've been doing it ever since. So in a year or two, I'm going to transition it to new generation leadership. I'll still stay around as the chair emeritus, but I found a number of younger people, actually 2 generations down, that I think will be able to take this over and keep it moving forward.
Megadiverse ecosystems act as natural carbon sinks, absorbing harmful emissions from the atmosphere, making them crucial in the fight against the climate crisis.
You developed this concept of mega diversity countries. That was in 1986. Maybe you could explain it, and the importance, I think, of concepts, because that comes through too in your writings. Actually having a title and conceptually kind of describing something. It's very important, isn't it?
Well, first of all, I'm really into priority setting. And there's so many issues that we're facing that you really have to pick and choose what the highest priorities are. So for a long time now, going back, it's getting on 40 years now, I've always focused on how can we effectively set priorities for conservation based on where most of the biodiversity is and where most of the threats are. So again, working from the base of primates, I looked at where primates were distributed, and I saw that, looking at the numbers, I saw that 4 countries, Brazil, Indonesia, Madagascar, and Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, by themselves accounted for 2/3 of all primate species. Primates are found in more than 90 countries, but those 4 account for more than 2/3 of all primates. So I said, this is an interesting thing. Why don't I look at biodiversity in general and see how that's distributed? And looking at it in detail, I came up with 17 countries, and I've now increased it to 18 countries that are responsible for 2/3 of all biodiversity, all species on the planet. And that includes terrestrial, freshwater, and marine. All of the megadiversity countries have marine ecosystems.
Yeah, I interviewed the Ecuadorian ambassador here, and believe me, they really picked up on that. Another concept, high biodiversity wilderness areas. This is another area. Talk to us about that.
Well, the high biodiversity wilderness area concept is really the complement to the biodiversity hotspots. So I should probably describe them first. This is a concept that was created in 1988 by Norman Myers, who's a famous thinker in conservation in general. He's passed away now, but he published a paper in 1988 called Biodiversity Hotspots, and he picked 10 places that were super high in biodiversity and at great risk. Places like Madagascar, tropical Andes, the Philippines, a number of others. And I saw that and I immediately said, wow, this fits in so well with my thinking on setting priorities. But I saw that he'd missed a few places. So I sent him a letter. We used letters in those days and not email. And I said, Norman, this is great, but I think you missed a few. So 2 years later, he published another paper in which he took it up to 18 hotspots, including a number of the places I had suggested. And the CEO there said, well, why don't you come and work with us? And so we went back and forth for about 3 months. And then finally I said, okay, I'll come over there. I brought 10 of my people with me from World Wildlife Fund, and we adopted the hotspots concept. And over the course of the next couple of decades, we refined it several times. We produced a book that had 25 hotspots. Then we raised it to 34, and now with a couple of other additions, we've got up to 36 hotspots. These hotspots once occupied about 16% of the land surface of the planet. This is an area roughly equivalent to Russia and Australia combined. Cumulatively, they've lost about 90%. So what remains in these hotspots is about 2% of the land surface of the planet. Not very much. It's about an area about the size of India or the 5 largest US states combined. And in that 2%, you have as endemic species found nowhere else, at least 50% of all plants and animals. So this is an incredible concentration of life forms, an incredible level of threat, Madagascar being the classic example, which has lost 90% and has unbelievable biodiversity that's not only found nowhere else, but deep evolutionary lineages. It's not just endemic species that are found nowhere else, but endemic genera, entire endemic families, deep lineages that if you lose them, you've lost a significant part of global biodiversity. So we concentrated on those areas, and then when I moved to Rewild 7 years ago, I again brought the biodiversity concept with me. But it's a very powerful tool. We've raised, when I was at Conservation International, we raised a couple of $2 billion using that as a campaign theme, and it continues to be a strong focus to the present day. We were even able in 2000 to create a mechanism called the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund, which continues to this day. And it brings resources from a number of countries like Japan, France, European Union, some foundations, Conservation International itself, and focuses on civil society organizations in the hotspots and empowers them to carry out conservation.
And the threats, have they diminished over time, or are they still there?
Threats haven't diminished. The threats continue to grow, and it's a never-ending battle. There are no final victories in conservation. You can achieve victories, but you always have to be vigilant that something doesn't hit you sideways or frontal, and creates all sorts of setbacks. So it's a never-ending battle. And of course, forest destruction, pollution, you name it. Climate change, obviously, being a big threat now. It's never ending, but you just have to take great pleasure in the successes that you have, but remain ever vigilant and keep moving forward.
And as stewards of the land, I guess you've been at this for a long time. We've been kind of woeful, all of us collectively, but there is one, I guess you would say, subgroup that's done very well in terms of being stewards, and that would be indigenous people. Can you talk about that?
Well, they do, and we really need to pay more attention to the way they see the world, their perceptions, their worldviews, but they're always under the gun. Brazilian Amazon, you've got about 3 million hectares in the Xingu indigenous territory, 17 tribes, totally, they don't number more than about 8,000 people, and yet they are taking care of 3 million hectares. That's about 7 million acres of largely pristine, largely intact forests. But they're surrounded, and increasingly surrounded by cattle ranches, soy plantations, everything. And many of these agro-industrial interests are constantly putting on the pressure to try to encroach on their land and take over that land. And then you have FUNAI, which is the Indian agency, which is headed up by Joenia Wapixana. She's a Wapixana woman, or Wapixana living in both Brazil and southern Guyana. And we've been working with a number of funding agencies to provide them with resources and to empower them. Look, I've been going to Brazil now for 53 years. I've never missed a year. I've gone to Brazil at least once every year since 1971. And Brazil, it gets a bad rap, but it's done as much for conservation as any country in the world. They've created vast areas of national parks and reserves, these huge indigenous lands.
Ecotourism is a powerful tool for reducing the carbon footprint of traditional tourism while promoting awareness and appreciation of diverse ecosystems and cultures.
You know, it's so interesting. I'm holding these. Ecotourism has become such a big deal. Talk to me about these pamphlets and how you kind of brought that about.
Well, ecotourism for me is a major force for conservation. I mean, tourism is the most rapidly growing industry in the world, and ecotourism is the most rapidly growing part. And what's great about it is that it really demonstrates to local communities, indigenous people, whoever, that conservation pays. They see results right away. People come in, they spend money, they want to see animals or plants or whatever, and all of a sudden the local people realize that, hey, maybe we should be paying attention to this. Maybe we shouldn't be cutting down these forests. Maybe we should be protecting these species instead of eating them. And all of a sudden the mindset changes. And I've done it in dozens and dozens and dozens of countries now using these brochures, which are just quick and dirty ways of showing tourists what's available, what you can see in terms of primates, and we're doing them for other species as well. And also producing t-shirts and posters and pins and anything that demonstrates to local people in these communities that what they have is special. So many times I've had people say, don't you have lemurs or don't you have monkeys in the US? I said, no, we don't have any. We haven't had non-human primates in the US for about 60 million years. And then they go, oh, wow, so what we have is really special, right? And this idea of doing primate watching really grew out of the bird watching community, which my son is a member of. And I've seen the incredible power of the bird watching community. They're so far advanced beyond anybody else, but they are extremely effective in developing a global community. And I thought, okay, there's 11,000 bird species. Birds are everywhere. Primates are never going to be able to reach that level because there's only about 700 and they're mostly in tropical rainforests. But we still can do something because they're such good flagship species for conservation of tropical forest systems, because 90% of them are in tropical forest. So I started doing this about 25 years ago, and it's really caught on. I mean, I have the largest life list. I have about 400 species that I've seen in the wild. So I kind of throw that out there and we compete with other primate watchers. We produce these materials and it's been pretty effective. And now we're trying to do it for other groups of animals as well.
Mittermeier has traveled to over 170 countries throughout his career, conducting fieldwork in all continents.
You mentioned that you go to Brazil, you go to Madagascar, you go to Suriname, you go to a lot of places. We can't. So take us with you. I mean, what's it like? Describe it for us. I mean, you hit the ground running. Are you out there discovering new species all the time? And what's it like?
Well, it's a mix. It's always a mix of different kinds of activities, which is what I find exciting about conservation. One day you'll be meeting with a head of state or a minister or some corporation who's operating in a particular area. The next day you're out in the field with an indigenous group in the middle of the Amazon or some other remote area, or you're out looking for species that you haven't seen before. And as I say, I've been fortunate to find a number of species new to science. I've been involved in the discovery of and the description of, I think we're up to 22 different species now. New to science, and I've got
some are named after you, even an ant.
I've got 8 named after me. 1 monkey from the Amazon, 2 lemurs, an ant that was named by the great Edward O. Wilson from Harvard, 3 frogs, and a lizard. I think that's all of them. And then I described a bunch of lemurs, South American monkeys. What else? Some turtles. Yeah, and so. It's never dull. You're always doing something different and exciting, and that's what I like about it.
You've worked in China as well. Can you talk about that?
I've been to China a number of times. I haven't actually done field work, but I've been in the field, but it's not one of my study areas. I work with Chinese scientists, supporting some of them. One area in particular that I find very interesting is the island of Hainan. China has 2 biodiversity hotspots, the mountains of south central China, the Hengduan Mountains, which are incredibly diverse, especially in plants. And then you've got a piece of what's called the Indo-Burma hotspot, which includes Indochina, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Burma, and the island of Hainan. And Hainan is very interesting because it has a gibbon species that is the rarest documented primate. The rarest species of primate for which we have good documentation. And it was down to, I think it was about 16 or 17 individuals back about 20 years ago. It's now up to 32, so it's a real success story. And it occurs only in one reserve, the Ba Wangling Reserve in Hainan. And we have a thing called the top 25 most endangered primates. Every 2 years, a group of experts at one of our conferences sits down and says, okay, what are the 25 primate species around the world that we really need to focus on over the next 2 years to make sure they don't go extinct? And in 2006, one of those species was the Hainan gibbon. So we had our publication. I traveled to Hainan, and I was quite surprised because you think of it as kind of a rainforest backwater. When I got there, the capital city, I think it's Haikou, is larger than Boston. And it's very well developed in many ways. So I gave some presentations there, and I said, look, this Hainan gibbon is the giant panda of Hainan. It is equivalent in importance to Hainan. The giant panda is to China as a whole. And they picked up on that. And since then, there's been a lot of activity on behalf of that species. It's getting a great deal of attention. The former president of IUCN, Zhang Xinsheng, he has an organization called EF Global, and he's taken on the cause of the Hainan gibbon in a major way. So every few months we have meetings about it, and that looks like it's going to be a success story. But of course, China also has wonderful thing, the giant panda itself, and then the golden monkeys, or the snub-nosed monkeys, these huge, fantastic monkeys, of which there are 7 different kinds, one of which occurs in Vietnam, and all the others are found in China. And next to the giant panda, they're the most fantastic animals there.
Yeah. Russ, thanks so much.
Thank you.